On a stormy summer night in 1912, an entire family went to sleep inside a small white house. By sunrise, every single person inside was dead. 8 victims slaughtered in the dark. To understand the shock of this crime, you have to understand where it happened. In 1912, Villisca, Iowa was a place where nobody locked their doors. Children played outside until sunset. Violent crime was practically non-existent. 𝗧𝗵𝗲, his wife Sarah, and their 4 children had spent the evening at a community church event. Joining them for the night were 2 young visiting sisters, Lena and Ina Stillinger. They walked back to the Moore family home. By midnight, 8 innocent people were fast asleep inside, completely unaware it would be their last night alive. The violence in Villisca suggested something unsettling, that even in a town built on mutual trust, the walls of a home provided no real barrier against a determined predator. When investigators processed the scene, they found every door and window intact. There were no broken panes of glass and no splintered door frames. Without signs of a break-in, the logic was narrow. The killer was either a guest the family trusted, or someone who had slipped inside and waited while the house was still empty. The evidence points to the latter. The killer likely entered the house after midnight and waited silently in the shadows while the family moved through their evening routines and fell into a deep sleep. The true horror of this crime lies in that realization. For the Moore family, their own sanctuary had secretly become an inescapable trap. Sometime around 2 a.m., the murderer finally moved. They didn't bring a weapon. Instead, they armed themselves with 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗆's own axe, found on the property, and climbed the dark stairs. Looking at the second-floor layout, you can trace the killer's path. They moved systematically from room to room, targeting entire families in total darkness. Parents and children were executed side by side. The attacks were so swift that victims died in their beds without waking up. The level of physical violence was difficult for even seasoned detectives to process. Some victims suffered so many violent axe blows to the head that investigators could barely recognize them the next morning. The systematic nature of the attacks suggests a motive beyond theft or panic. The sheer scale of the violence upstairs points toward a killer driven by a need for total annihilation. The attack didn't end upstairs. The killer eventually made their way down to the first-floor guest room, where the 2 visiting sisters were sleeping. Here, investigators discovered a shift in behavior. The pattern of brutality differed from the upstairs victims, and one of the sisters showed signs suggesting the killer may have assaulted her before the fatal blows were struck. This change in method of operation forces a dark question. Were the visiting girls the primary target all along, rather than the Moore family? After the murders, the narrative takes a bizarre turn. The killer didn't flee into the night. They stayed in the living areas of the house. Instead, they engaged in strange ritualistic behavior. They covered every mirror with cloth, they hid the windows, and cleaned the murder weapon, leaving it behind. Then comes the most unsettling detail of all. Detectives found a bowl of bloody water and plates of uneaten food, suggesting the killer comfortably lingered in the house for hours after the massacre. Over the years, police interrogated multiple suspects who fit this bizarre psychological profile. One was Reverend George Kelly, a traveling preacher with a history of mental instability. His erratic behavior and inconsistent confessions aligned with someone who would stay to eat next to a massacre. Other investigators theorized the murders were the work of a traveling serial killer, someone moving completely unseen between sleeping Midwestern towns by rail, potentially responsible for similar family annihilations across the country. Whether it was a local madman or a transient phantom, the conclusion remains the same. The killer's ability to calmly inhabit a slaughterhouse reveals a mind completely devoid of human empathy. By the next morning, neighbors noticed something was wrong. The Moore house was entirely silent. The curtains were tightly drawn, and no one had come outside to start their daily chores. A concerned neighbor finally decided to check on the family. They opened the door, saw the blood, and ran back out into the morning light. Despite the massive, gruesome nature of the crime and the time spent lingering inside, the killer had successfully walked out the front door in the dark and vanished without a single witness. That discovery marked the end of the town's era of unlocked doors. The Moore home would never function as a residence again. It had become a permanent site of national fascination and dread. Over a century has passed since that morning. Despite countless arrests, interrogations, and theories, nobody was ever convicted. Today, the Moore house still stands, and for those who visit, it rarely feels empty. Visitors report hearing children whispering in the rooms and describe an overwhelmingly dark presence lingering in the hallways. It's as if the intense psychological terror and sudden extreme violence of that night left an invisible, permanent scar on the physical structure itself. The lack of justice is only one part of the Villisca nightmare. The true horror is the notion that the killer's evil was so profound, it forever trapped the victim's home in that single bloody night.